First of all, I want to get away from the dictionary definition of a constitution. A constitution must have purpose, and the purpose must be to create a nation that conduces to the greatest happiness of the greatest number of people. That is what a constitution must be. And having set the objective of the constitution, you then frame a constitution to achieve that objective.
Because we really do have a race problem. Those divisions are real. We see it in our politics, we see it in our trade union. We see that they take the divisions with them. Look at where people live in this US. You have enclaves in the Bronx and in Richmond Hill and in Brooklyn. They're taking the division with them.
Women are dying in the streets, and we have a government pontificating running around campaigning for women's vote. No women should vote in this election coming up unless there is something done to the legislation as Magistrate Kim is advocating.
That voices like ours that are not in the political trench fighting it out, voices like ours should become stronger. One of the things about the Caribbean is that we have never had one discourse. Bass will know the days of the New World and the Old World and the radical left and so on. What we had was this concourse of ideas, which I think in the early days of independence pushed us in a certain direction. We've got to move back to that point of having these multiple discourses.
Good morning. It is Saturday, October 26th. I am Whitney Prasad, and today I have on air with me Miss Rihanna Lautan and Kimberly Seymour. We're going to be talking about bullying and how it has affected the Caribbean region, more so because emphasis is not really placed on bullying in the Caribbean, as we just see it as another thing that, you know, we have to probably endure as a part of growth and so forth. So today we're going to be weighing in on this topic, and feel free to drop your comments below on our Facebook Live as we shed some light on this issue and possible solutions and what things that we can do given first-hand knowledge from the first world as it relates to bullying. So welcome on air with us today, Miss Lautan and Miss Seymour.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're gonna be asking you both to weigh in on the topic. I know that we're all out of high school. We're probably not even doing tertiary education anymore. For most of you, you would have already graduated with your masters or your PhDs or, you know, something to that end. So I just want for you to weigh in on the topic as when you were in high school or probably university level, and if you were at some point bullied, and then we can talk about your success story as it relates to, you know, overcoming those challenges and then moving forward to graduate and just sticking it out while you still had to face those minor, or not minor, but those major challenges in school. So we can start with you, Miss Seymour, and then we'll go with Miss Lautan.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Well, bullying for me is something, it's an epidemic, more or less. And even in Guyana, where people may consider it a third world country, it's still very prevalent. Growing up, I never really had an issue with bullying or being bullied, but I've witnessed that several persons were bullied. And I've seen the effects that it has had on them. Of course, as time went on, they would have, you know, outgrown these bullying or whatever it is, but I do think that it's a problem and it needs to be addressed. It needs to be addressed starting from within the household. So, for example, some parents, they may be aware that their child or children have those kinds of tendencies, so they need to address it, root it out inside of the home. If they don't do that, it means that it would, you know, it would flow over into the school, and then they could end up bullying other kids, which is never a good thing. So yeah, I definitely believe it's an epidemic, and I think the problem needs to be treated starting at home. We need to root it out at home.
Okay, as an educator working at the University of Guyana, I know, have you experienced any of these such cases where you maybe would have had to intervene and shed some light on why a person should not bully even though we're adults at university level, or so we may say, do you see these things happening still at the University of Guyana?
Not in my department, at least. And I do think that's because at the university level, it's more of a level playing field. It's no longer primary school or secondary school. Many persons, even those who were previously bullied, they recognize that it's not a way of life for them and they don't have to accept it. So it's not as prevalent. So I would say that the bullying is more it's on a very minuscule scale. It's on a very small scale. But I have had to intervene in cases whereby persons might have verbally tried to bully a quieter one in the classroom, to pick on them, to get them to agree with something or get them to disagree with something. So usually I would let the bully or the set of bullies know that you can't talk to somebody like that. That person is an adult, just as you are an adult. So you need to be careful with the approach that you use to them. You need to speak to that person. You need to treat them with respect and treat them as an adult. And thankfully, I've never had any backlash. It's always been smooth sailing, and I think that's likely because of the age range of the students. A lot of persons are grown, and they understand that you don't just accept anything from anyone. So it's not as prevalent at the university level, at least not in my department.
Okay. So recently we've had in Guyana, Miss Lutan, a case where a Muslim student was beaten, her hijab ripped off, and this was a case where the teachers, some of the educators actually tried to tell her to, not report this incident to her parents. What would you say in this regard? What would you want to weigh in and say to those people?
First of all, that is wrong. No one should have to endure any type of bullying, and then this is supposed to be your superior, your teacher, your protector while you're in school, to discourage you from really reporting something like that, I think is wrong. And it's a culture that needs to change. And I agree with Ms. Seymour. It has to start in the home, because these people that are bullying, and it starts in the home and they take it to school, they're going to take it to their professional working lives when they get older, and it's just going to continue, and the epidemic is going to continue. It's going to be a cycle, and it's going to continue. It needs to stop somewhere. And I think a lot of that has to do with also educating our teachers that these are things that should not happen in the school, and it should, if it does happen, there has to be a venue for them to follow. There has to be some kind of outlet. These kids should be counseled in some kind of way and bring them back. Find out what's going on in the home, because a lot of times there are things that's going on in the home that might be affecting their school life, and they will project that onto others. It might not even be the kid's fault, but there's something going on and they need to get to the root of the problem.
Okay. Do you think that we are doing enough in the Caribbean to make parents, teachers, make the citizens and the residents of the Caribbean generally more aware of the negative impacts bullying can have on our children and the lasting effects of bullying?
No,
you
because
both
I
can feel
feel
free
like,
to weigh in at any time. Go ahead. Sorry.
It's been socially acceptable, and this is how it's been. No one has seen it as something that needs to change, but there's a lot in the world that has changed. There's a lot that impacts the way that kids act these days. It's a lot that they are exposed to. They're exposed to more things worldwide than we were when we were growing up, and they're exposed to so much more. The internet, for one, has made it so easy for them to access things that has more violence attached to it. Parents don't necessarily monitor what their kids watch 24/7. They might not even have the knowledge to say, well, I need to filter certain things that they need to watch, or certain music that they listen to, or certain conversations that they may have. I think it's a lot to do with the educational standards and the culture that they have in the household, and that's just projected wherever they go, whether it's to work, it's to school, it's to go hang out with their friends, it's to socialize. Whatever they're doing, it's going to be projected out there.
Okay. I remember in 2018 there were calls for the government in Guyana to actually launch an anti-bullying campaign. I don't think we've gone that far ahead as it relates to that, or if we have, I'm not sure how far. Kimberly, can you weigh in and let us know, as an educator or a mom, a parent in Guyana? I know you have a daughter in school. Can you say if there has been any changes as it relates to that, and if we've actually taken any steps toward implementing an anti-bullying campaign that will, fight for these children who can't fight for themselves?
Well, to my knowledge, the planning and implementation, it's still in its early stages. But I do believe that even with it being in its early stages, parents have the primary responsibility to teach their children about bullying. Teach them what bullying is, the forms of bullying, and how they can deal with being bullied, or even how to avoid becoming a bully. So, for example, my daughter, she's about to be 4 years old. And, randomly sometimes I ask her, if someone hits you in school or they tell you something mean, what would you do? Because I want to see her reaction. Would she retaliate in the same kind? Would she hit them back or tell them something back? And I try to encourage her. If someone is threatening to hit you, or if someone hits you, you go and tell the teacher and you tell me immediately. So at least I can have a hand in the matter. But the cycle of bullying continues when the children are so afraid. Perhaps they're being terribly bullied and the person says, don't tell anyone. So they don't report to the teacher, they don't report to the parent. I understand the teachers, they have a lot on their hands, so it's easy for them to overlook when something might be happening. But parents need to have open relationships with their children. Tell me everything that's happening at school. Even if someone is calling you a simple name, like stupid or whatever it is, tell me when I come, or tell me when you come home so that we can address it. So it all filters back to parents teaching their children everything about bullying at home, and even helping them to avoid becoming bullies, because a lot of children, they mirror what they see at home. Perhaps their father bullies their mom, or their siblings bully them, and they want to emulate that same kind of thing when they're at school. So we need to root it out in the home, again, so that when these children are in the education system, they are not bullied, or they don't become bullies themselves. But I do believe a lot of work is still to be done, even with the era of an anti-bullying campaign. It can start within the house. The anti-bullying campaign can start within the house, between the parents or the parent and their child or their children. Let them know it's wrong, let them know why they should avoid it, and let them know that there can be serious repercussions, because some bullies don't win every battle. Some children store it up and then they retaliate in kind at a later date, and that could be detrimental to the initial bully. So we need to root it out in its early stages. And even if it's something, I see a viewer is commenting that it's from generation to generation. So indeed, parents have to work it out with each other and with their children too.
Okay. So in 2018, there was a death of a child, a 10-year-old child, Rosanna Akila Harris. A student reportedly kicked her in the stomach, and she, succumbed to those injuries. It's very sad to know that we think that it's just a minor kick, and that some parents are, I'm not bashing parents, but some parents might say that it's just a minor kick, or it's just a minor thing, and that's a little children thing, but things like this, it's very serious and could lead to the death of a child. So as an APRN, Ms. Lotan, have you had any experiences in the past with children coming into the hospital or the healthcare system because of bullying of any sort, whether it be mental health, physical abuse, anything to that end?
Well, my career has been mostly with adults, but I know in the emergency room we would get kids that would come in with injuries that are unexplained. But I have had elder abuse, and that's something else that is hardly talked about, is elder abuse that goes on. But you're right, it does cause a lot of psychological injuries to kids, and parents may not even realize that their kids are being tortured on a mental level, and because they keep all of these things bottled up inside, because they are being bullied on a daily basis. They might find that they have no one to talk to, or the bully might be threatening them. Well, if you say anything, I'm just gonna, continue doing it, or maybe threaten to do other things to them. So there is a sense of fear that's instilled in kids that are being bullied, and it has to stop. It has to stop. But they have to have the tools in the home, in the school, in the public arena to be able to address these issues.
And since you've mentioned in the home as one of the things that we need to focus on as well, I know we're talking specifically about bullying in school, but let's also shed some light on bullying in the home, because many people, many children are often faced with, bullying from parents. We may not see it that way, but again, I'm not bashing parents, but then there are some parents who were, brought up in this type of environment where we meet out this kind of rough attitude towards our children, and then these children in turn pick up on those behaviors and they take with them that same attitude to school and become the bullies. So can we shed some light on that? You both can feel free to jump in at any time and shed light on the issue. I just want us to talk about that too, because I think it is something that is affecting our community because of the many things, including that, the many taboo things, including that has been affecting the home.
Well, as you know, Whitney, I have a almost 4-year-old son who's also in school. And every day when he comes home, like Miss Seymour, I have that conversation with him. How was your day? What did you do today? Who are your friends? And things like, and he's 3.5 years old. But he will tell me if there's anything, that happened in the school. And I always tell him, if there's someone that hits you or pushes you or does anything to you, you don't need to do that. Just go and let your teacher know. That's who you need to report it to. You don't retaliate. And I agree, it's what we teach our kids. That's what they will know. But the parents have to be very interactive and very cognizant of what your child is doing and be involved in your day-to-day life. I know it's hard. Even here in the US, parents work. Sometimes the kids and the parents are leaving at the same time to go out to school and to work. The parents don't see their kids until they come home in the evening. And it's very difficult to parent in that type of environment here. In Guyana, both parents might be working. It might be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kids. How can you it can be overwhelming, I guess, for a parent to keep track and question everyone. But I think we have to truly teach our kids to be each other's keeper. So you must be your brothers and your sisters' keeper. And they can also have the conversation with their siblings if need be. And having that type of connection and that kind of support, I think, will definitely curb some of that, behavior.
Okay, Miss Seymour,
Yeah,
can you weigh in on that?
yeah. I know in some situations it's out of the control of either parent. So let's say the mother might be bullied by the father, or the father might be bullied by the mother. It's it's not something that they can particularly control. But even with that being in the arena, the parent who is being bullied, they can still explain to their children that, look, this is not right. This is not the way it should be. You should, daddy should have respect for mommy, or mommy should have respect for daddy. You don't go about bullying people for their things, or bullying them or teasing them about something. And even though the proper example might not be set in the home, just by having that conversation with your child, they can be able to, ward off any tendencies of becoming bullies themselves. Because studies have shown that most bullies come from homes that are unstable.
Mm-hmm.
They probably only have one parent, or they have an example set in their home, perhaps by an older sibling, or even a younger sibling, because some younger siblings can bully their older siblings too. But apart from that, even in cases where an example might not necessarily be set, the parent can still have that conversation with the child and say, this is not how it's supposed to be, this is what is supposed to be done, and this is what I expect from you in school. I don't want you doing this to people because As you can see in the home, it's a lot of turmoil when this happens or that happens. So that's not something that I want you to practice. You should not do it. And even in cases whereby both parents might be setting a very terrible example, the teachers can have very small chats, probably with each child, or maybe on a group scale to find out, what's happening in the home, or how can we stop ourselves from being bullied, or how can we prevent ourselves from becoming bullies. And in that way, it doesn't help to eliminate bullying, but it helps to probably lessen the effects or decrease the scale that bullying occurs on.
Okay. Actually, when I was growing up, I went in primary school and high school. I was actually a little shy girl, so I've had issues with people bullying me for either my pencil or something that I had. It may not seem that way now, but I've had those issues in school. And what people don't know is that when we bully someone, it really affects that person. It can really lower their confidence level, their self-esteem. You look at yourself differently after that. So can we just can we just talk about that a little? How much of a lasting effect this can have on a person in terms of their self-esteem and their confidence level and the way they carry themselves in the whole. That person becomes over time like a shell. You just would do things to make people feel happy, feel comfortable. Whatever makes a person feel better, you will do. So it'll become you pleasing somebody else, and in that kind of light. So can we talk a little bit about that?
Okay. It's exactly true what you said. Some persons are of a weaker kind in that they are not as resilient as others. They're definitely not as strong, and the simplest of things can affect them. So, for example, I'm in this high school group. I finished high school several years ago, about 15 or 16 years ago. And one girl commented in the group that she's still suffering the effects of being bullied. And she would have finished school even more years than I would have finished school. About 18 years ago, she said it really had a long-lasting effect on her. She has become introverted. She's become a people pleaser, and she's literally scared to even, talk too hard to anybody about anything. So the dangers of suffering from bullyism are great, especially if someone is already having mental issues. When you bully that person, that can stay with them forever. And in turn, when they're choosing a marriage mate or someone, they might end up being with a bully themselves. So the cycle just continues, and they might pass that on to their children. So we need to root out the cycle of bullying from its early stages. We need to teach children about the consequences of bullying. Some persons might even contemplate taking their own life because they think that they can't do it anymore. There's no way out of it, and that's the best way out. So we can avoid these things from happening. We can prevent them from happening, rather, by teaching our children that it's not the way, showing them the consequences, even the extreme ones. We need to speak to them in plain language. Let them know what it is and how detrimental it can be to someone or even to them if they are affected by bullying themselves.
Ms. Lotan?
It definitely impacts a person's way that they see themselves. And like she said, you become a people pleaser rather than striving for what you should be doing for yourself. And by doing that, they kind of hold themselves back and stifle their potential. And it can lead to things like depression, which can lead to suicide. If the person has mental issues attached to it, it can even cause them to have erratic outbursts or, and be violent. And these are all different aspects that bullying can have. And people need to understand the impact that it have. It's not something to be taken lightly. It's not just me, pushing you in the courtyard at school, or me stealing your pencil, or me taking your lunch money. These things have lasting impacts on the people that they affect. And that's, a lot of, I think, groundwork, education has to be done on, what bullying is. How does it affect the party that is being bullied? What are the consequences, the lifelong consequences that it has? And these things need to be said, it needs to be taught, people need to understand it, so you really get a true sense of what an impact it has.
Okay. We have some of our viewers on Facebook and the YouTube page also tuning in and giving their views and their opinions on the topic bullying. One of the comments that we got was that we need to give back the children to the village. In this 21st century age that we're living in, I find that many times parents are often scolded or being scolded or put down if they're meting out any type of punishments to their children. So it's hard to maybe contain or it's hard to say whether the parents probably will be able to handle their children who are bullies. Maybe those children will in turn back and try to hit the parent, and they themselves will have the issue of dealing with that type of thing, and so worrying about if the child will call in child services or something to that end. So what do you guys think about giving the children back to the village, and how responsible are we as elders to ensure that our community is back to its old state?
Well, the entire truth about the matter is that one, parents don't want to hand their children over to the village because over time, as simple as it seems, the village has deteriorated, the nature of the village, the people in the village, and two, the children themselves, they don't want to be handed over to the village. Even if the parent decides to hand them over to the village, they'll tell the village straight up, you're not my mom, you're not my dad, so you can't tell me anything. But in several years ago, probably from even before we were born or so on, the village had a key role to play in raising the child. A neighbor could correct you or discipline you and it would be fine. But in these times, neighbors and aunts and uncles, they don't have that leverage. They don't have such a long spoon to use to discipline the child or the children, so to speak. So for me, while the village idea sounds nice in theory, in practice, because society in itself has deteriorated, morals have deteriorated, people themselves have deteriorated, it's very hard to have the village to take over that child. The village itself needs work. So are we going to hand over our child or children to a village that's already in shambles? No. So we as parents, we need to extract ourselves from that village and try our best with our child or our children. If we have a supportive village, a friend, a family member, and we have trained our children to accept counsel, receive advice, then that village idea works out fine. But generally speaking, holistically speaking, the village raising child or children theory in these times, it has a lot of loopholes that would have to be fixed within the village before we can examine going back to that timing.
Okay. What is your take on that, Miss Lotan?
I have to agree with that because there's a lot of fixing that needs to happen before we can hand our kids over to other people to discipline them. And I think kids these days are very different from kids 10 or 20 years ago. We were more receptive to our neighbors disciplining us, or aunt or an uncle or someone else disciplining us, and we would respect that. In this day and age, I find that kids are not as receptive to that kind of environment. Even if they don't disrespect their parents at home, they will disrespect someone on the street that tries to intervene and tell them, well, what you're doing is not right. So the culture is definitely different. The environment is different. And I think as leaders moving forward that want to intervene and have an impactful intervention, we have to change along with the environment and adapt to the environment and kind of evolve and find ways that we can put out meaningful information and impactful information that will foster change in the kids today. Because we can say, yes, give them back to the village, but the village that was 10, 20 years ago is not the same village today. Absolutely not. And I don't think that it would have the same effect that it did 10 or 20 years ago.
Okay. This morning, I read in the news that a teen was actually found, the body of a teen was actually found in a shallow grave. And some of the details leading up to that story was that the child was constantly hanging out with a very older person. And this touches on the issue of, bullying as it relates to sexual abuse. What can we really say about bullying as it relates to sexual abuse? I know it probably might not be one of the biggest things that we are faced with in our country, but this is something too that has become known, that we find older people just kind of friending that too comes back to giving our children to the village, because we're not sure who we're dealing with in this day and age. We're giving our child to somebody in hopes that this person will mentor them or give them some kind of insight on how to be a little bit more wise or a bit more confident, and next thing you know, we're finding our child in a shallow grave, and it's very unfortunate. So we can talk about that a little and see where it has brought us today when we decide to give our children back to the village.
I think the village mentality, trust can be misplaced, because not everyone that presents themselves as someone who is there for you and is trying to be helpful is actually there for you and in the best interest of the child. They may have their own ulterior motives. I am so sorry, this is my child. Liam, please go outside. Thank you. I am so sorry about that. Sorry, their trust might be very misplaced, okay? So it might not be the best thing for you to trust an older adult with your child.
Okay.
Say hi.
Hi.
Okay, so moving forward,
No, please hold.
we can also talk about how common physical bullying is around the world. This is not something that has been affecting just the Caribbean, but the reason we're shedding light on it is because the Caribbean, we kind of downplay the effects of these things, and we kind of brush it off sometimes, and we say that a child should be a child, and these things are gonna happen. But there's also the issue of bullying around the world, and there's a report by the United Nations which talks about 1 in 3 boys and girls being bullied at least once a month in a school, and so there is that too. What do you guys think we can do? I know we're all speaking from our professional levels. You as an APRN, and Miss Lotana and Miss Seymour as an educator. What do you think we can do as a people to?
Sorry, I'll be back in a minute.
What do you think we can do as a people to actually move forward in this regard? I know we would have shed some light on some of the things we can do, but on a more holistic basis, what do you think we can do as a people to make this work in our country?
The implementation of the anti-bullying campaign is a good one, but I do believe that anti-bullying campaigning should start from the inception of raising a child, teaching that child from a very young age that simple things. You might have a sibling and you bully that sibling for a toy, or you bully that sibling for their food. That's unacceptable. Oftentimes as parents, sometimes we tend to ignore things because the child is a year old or the child is 2 years old, and we think it's funny, and then that kind of rolls over to preschool, nursery school, and then that child, before we know it, is a bully. So rooting it out in its very early stages from the inception is very, very important to curbing, to decreasing the incidences of bullying. Of course, it's not possible for us to root all of it out because that's just the way of the world. That's just how society is these days. But we can try to prevent it from happening by looking after those within our own home circle, our own little village in our houses. So whether it's our children, it could be our cousins, we need to root it out from an early age. Most of these things start from as young as a few months old. The child, a 6-month-old child or a 7-month-old child, might bully the mother into giving him or her the breast because they're hungry. So you literally see that child fighting the mother down and pulling it out until the mom gives in and she gives the child. But we don't think anything of it because it's a baby and he wants to breastfeed or she wants to breastfeed, so that's okay. But we need to teach our children, no, you don't bully mommy for something. Mommy will give it to you when she's ready. You don't bully me to put on the TV. You don't throw a tantrum, because throwing tantrums are forms of bullying the parent too. Because you know that the louder you get, the parents will try to quiet you down and they'll give you something to appease you. So train our children, even if it's not our children, train the children in our immediate environment, whether we teachers or whatever it is, that it's not acceptable, it's not okay, and it probably might not work out in your best interest because there are people who will retaliate. Because some parents do tell their children, if anyone pushes you, push them back. If he hits you, hit him back. If they spit on you, you spit back on them. And that's just forcing the cycle to continue. So we need to teach them how to put a stop to it, and we need to root it out as soon as possible. From inception, as soon as we get that child, we notice it and we try to root it out as far as possible.
Okay. Let's not put down the efforts as well. Let's also point out the efforts rather of the countries around the world and the various bodies as well that have been doing great work in this regard. For example, UNESCO, and they've been actually going into countries and working along with the various ministries, like the Ministry of Social Cohesion, I would say, for Guyana, and probably the Child Protection Agency, and they would have been implementing programs and making significant progress towards reducing or containing at least school violence and bullying and these things. Do you think, Ms. Lotan, do you think it would be a good idea for us to set up possibly health facility in our health facilities, offices for mental health workers, where we can actually have our children go in and meet with a therapist or a counselor, and in the school as well? Do you guys think that this will be something that will be beneficial to not eradicating as such, but curbing bullying?
Absolutely, 100%. I think counselors stationed at schools are 100% something that they need to do. It'll be effective. It may not, like you said, eliminate 100% of what is going on, but at least you can root them out to see what is happening, if it's something in the home that's happening, if it's something outside of the home, and find out what the problem is, and hopefully render some kind of care or environment or a different outlet for these kids where they can kind of express themselves better instead of, projecting their anger or displeasement with something else onto someone else.
Okay. Kimberly, do we have anything of this sort in the schools throughout Guyana? Could you say if we have like a counselor set up in nursery schools or at university level where students can feel free to go and lay their burdens on a therapist or talk about the issues that are affecting them in confidentiality?
I know for certainty most secondary schools are outfitted with a counselor or a welfare officer that the child can go to in the event of anything, or if the teacher or the professor might notice that something is wrong with that child, they recommend that they see the welfare officer or the counselor. But at the lower levels, for example, preschool and nursery, I don't necessarily think that it's enforced, because at that level, people tend to overlook it. They tend to think that, okay, he's only 3 or she's only 4, and they'll outgrow it. It's just a phase. It's a terrible twos. But of course, the terrible twos can turn into the terrible 13s and then the terrible 20s, and you're just a terrible adult. So it needs to be instituted, I believe, across all the levels, because they're bullies in preschool. I've seen it for myself, standing outside as an observer. You have this one child that dominates all the toys, and if you dare take that toy from him or her, he snatch it back from you. Some children scratch, they push. So we have these things at the lower levels, but oftentimes they're ignored. So indeed, having a welfare officer or having someone who is trained in childhood rearing, trained to detect that this child has the tendencies of a bully, and try to work with that child. Maybe once a week, twice a week, speak to them in their own language. That's wrong. We don't do that to people. That's not nice. Work with them, because toddlers or infants who are bullies, they become adults who are bullies. You don't just start bullying at age 40, or you don't just start becoming a bully at age 14. It's something that's within you. You witness it, and sometimes you manifest it in very small ways. You take things that don't belong to you, you don't want to give it back. And people overlook it and they think it's okay. So yeah, a welfare officer at even the preschool level, a counselor or a pediatrician, someone who is trained to deal with it, I think it's a good idea. Not only at the secondary level or the university level as we have it, but at the lower levels too.
Do you think that this question is for both of you, and you can feel free to answer at any point. Do you think that we are faced with the issue of ratio in terms of bullying boys to girls? Do we have the issue of boys being considered more of a physical bully and girls being more of a psychological, bully? Do you think we have that issue in Guyana, or it's just a general sense of the physical bullying as well as the psychological effects followed by the, the physical bullying?
I think that the ratio is more or less a toss-up. Boys and girls have interchanged roles so much that it's not surprising to find a female bully. As we all saw in the recent video on social media with the student from Berbice who was bullied, it's not strange to find a girl who will physically assault another girl. It's not strange to find a boy who will verbally abuse another boy or another girl. The roles are so much intertwined. They're so interchanged. It's hard to draw that line of differentiation to say one sex is psychological bullies, and the other sex, they're more verbal bullies. So it's a toss-up. Anybody's doing anything these days. People are doing, children especially are operating however they want to operate. And it all goes back to it being encouraged at a very small age. Your 2-year-old yells something mean to somebody else and you laugh it off. You don't say anything. Or your 6-year-old pushes another child on the playground and you don't say anything because, that child was in their way, so he had a right to push the child. Even at a very young age, boys and girls are psychological bullies and physical bullies. So, in my opinion, there's really no differentiation in whether a boy might just be a physical bully and a girl would be a psychological bully. The bullies are all over, and they take all different forms and shapes, whatever they think might be in their best interest. Perhaps if they're a bigger build than someone else, they might tend to be a physical bully. Or if they're a lot more vocal than someone else, then they tend to be a psychological bully or a verbal bully. They'll tell you hurtful things just because they have a big mouth and they want to use it. They think that they can get away with it. So I definitely think that the roles are interchanged. It's not level. It's kind of a level playing field in the sense that psychological bullies, verbal bullies, and so on, there's no clear distinction between them, at least based on my observations. Probably Ms. Lochan might have noted differently in her arena.
Ms. Lochan?
No, I think you're absolutely right. It's definitely intertwined and mixed. It's equal on both sides because there's nothing that says that a woman can't bully a woman or another man or even kids, or a man can't bully a woman or the kids or another man, whether it's verbal or physical, I think, both sexes have definitely leveled up on that.
Okay. I want us also to talk about the issue of cyberbullying. This has become something big. We've seen people making movies out of it. We probably would not have seen some of the local aspect of cyberbullying in Guyana or the Caribbean as such. We may have not placed emphasis on that for some reason or the other, but this is also something that has been affecting our youth and even grown people, adults as well. How do you think cyberbullying has affected the Caribbean region, if at all, or maybe from your experiences, Miss Lotan?
I think the danger in it is not knowing who the person is that you're speaking to on the other side. Because in this day and age of technology, a 48-year-old man can claim to be a 16-year-old boy. And it's a dangerous arena. I think parents have to really filter what their kids are doing out here on social media, which is very, very hard to monitor because there are so many outlets that kids can get on. There's Facebook, there's Instagram, there's Twitter, there's all these venues that they have, and it's hard for parents to keep track of that. But I think, there has to be a conversation about it. There has to be a conversation about what you can and cannot do, and if there's something that is alarming, that they should absolutely bring it to their parents. But you have to have that open, honest relationship with your child where they feel comfortable to tell you something that might be very uncomfortable for them. Because there might be someone on the internet influencing them to do things that they necessarily wouldn't do on their own or act on their own, but they get that encouragement from a stranger and they will absolutely act on it. So I think parents need to be involved and have those types of conversations, because like I said, the culture, the environment, society today is very, very different from when I was a teenager and going to school. We didn't have any of that stuff. Our outlet was to talk to our friends, and now they can do whatever they want because there's so many different outlets for them.
Okay, Kimberly, what are some of the issues you face as a parent as it relates to controlling what or how you, or what are some of the solutions to you controlling or monitoring what your child watches on social media or does on social media? Even at a very tender age, we will know that children are very in tune with social media, Facebook, Instagram, and these things, even YouTube. YouTube can also be a platform for communication because now there is a messenger where you're able to message persons. And there's a lot of these gamers who our children are constantly watching, and they can communicate with them. So what are some of the methods that you've taken as a parent to actually monitor what your child is doing on her tablet or her phone when you're not around or when you're busy in the kitchen?
Mm-hmm. Well, for one thing, I've tried to avoid leaving her on the internet alone because we know kids these days are very smart. They know how to tap on the YouTube icon. They know how to scroll through, and they'll tap, 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 even though they can't read, and they'll find exactly what they want to watch. And as a parent, sometimes it kind of works out for you because you can leave them with the tablet or the phone, and you can get some me time. I'm sure Ms. Lochan would agree with me on that.
Yes.
So you give them the tablet, and they scroll, they tap, and they watch for hours upon hours. But there's a danger in letting your child roam an unknown street alone, so to speak, that they don't know anyone on, because anything can pop up. You have YouTube ads, and recently you have this thing that pops up, Momo or something of the sort.
Yes.
And there are even more several dangerous things out there. So for one, I have tried to limit the time online. If it's on YouTube, I try to ensure that I'm there so I can see what she's tapping on. And I've tried to do more downloads. So I'm going to download a specific app. If it's a learning app or a cartoon, I'm going to try to download it on the actual phone. And so as to avoid her having to go, tapping or looking for it. And another thing that I've also implemented, I've tried to teach her that some things you don't watch. If you see something pop up that you're not accustomed to, I need you to bring that phone to me. Even if it's an ad, it's not a cartoon, it's not something that you've seen before, you bring your phone to me or you bring the tablet to me, draw my attention to it. Say, Mom, I don't know what this is and I don't want to watch it. So I try to teach her to be responsible from within. I don't just want it to be me saying, oh, what's that? Let me see what you're doing. I want her to recognize that there are dangers out there and you need to protect yourself because there are bad people online. People can bully you or try to blackmail you, send me a picture or, I'm going to do this, or somebody might pop up and say, I have your naked pictures or something, and if you don't send me more, I'm going to put it on the internet or so on. So we need to teach our children the dangers of being online. It's like a place that you go to, you don't know anybody. Everyone is wearing masks. Would we allow people, thank you, Talio, would we allow people with masks in our home just to enter our living room, to sit there to socialize with our children? No, we won't. So why should we just let them run free on the internet? The internet could be a very terrible place, especially if you're a victim of cyberbullying. That can spiral out of control in a minute. People screenshot, they save, they download, and then they broadcast the message to whoever they feel free to do that. So responsible timing on the internet, controlled shows that they can watch or controlled applications. I think that those are two very important points to me that I've tried to implement. Even though it helps when you just leave them to randomly browse YouTube and tap, 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 you can have hours of me time, hours of alone time. But we got to find the balance. Do we want hours of alone time and then our child or children, they're exposed to several dangers online? No. So control timing and the controlled use of these apps or videos or so on. I'm sure Ms. Lochan would agree because she has a small child too.
Yes, my toddler is not allowed to go on YouTube by any means. He is not allowed to go on YouTube. I do enforce parental controls. I do enforce the amount of time that he's allowed to use his tablet. And, if there is something that he goes into, I always say, well, Liam, do you think that this is something appropriate that you should be watching or that you should be doing? And he absolutely knows the difference between right and wrong and what he should and should not be watching. And he would tell me no, and he would give it back. So he understands. And I think, it's because I've had those conversations with him. And it's because I tell him, well, these are things that you're not allowed to do. Or if it's something that you're not supposed to be watching. So he knows. He definitely knows. And I think that comes from the constant, conversation and making sure that whatever he is looking at and is being exposed to is something that's appropriate for his age.
Right, and I think this talks again to the issue of how quickly we respond to these things and how open we are as parents to our children, The minute our child says something about someone bullying them, we should jump on it right away, immediately. Just like the issue with the girl who was bullied, the Muslim girl who was bullied in Guyana. Her mother was the one who actually fought for her, and many times you find that parents, sometimes they just throw it aside and they don't take it seriously, but I think as parents we are to respond quickly where bullying is concerned. This can have a lasting effect on our children, and it can be one of the biggest downfalls for them. Some people might drop out of school. They might end up missing school every day because they're afraid of going in to get bullied. They might cut themselves off from society, their social lives, because someone is bullying them online. So as parents, as responsible adults, as the community, as the village, we are supposed to be able to step in quickly and try to be open-minded and talk to our children about things that are affecting them. I know for a fact that you both have been doing this, and it's one of the things we want to encourage parents in the Caribbean to do. This is the first of a series we will be having on bullying. It was really great having you both on today and weighing in. We had a very fruitful discussion, and before we even wrap up, I want you both to actually talk to the parents and give them some ideas and let them know. Miss Lotan, you're living in a first world country. Some of the things that you think we can implement in Guyana as a third world country, as it relates to bullying, I don't know if that will make much of a difference, but you know, one person can start something. I say this because in Guyana we do things differently. In the Caribbean we do things differently from the way we do things in the US or Canada or in Europe. So what are some of the things you think we can do, some of the international things we can do to focus on bullying in Guyana?
I think first and foremost, it's the educational factor that we need to educate our parents, our teachers, our neighbors. The entire village needs to be educated on the circumstances of bullying and the impact that it has on kids. And I think the more people that are exposed to what it is and the impact that it has, I think that's how we will foster change, and the culture will change based on that. But there may be a lot of parents that see these things happening and they think it's nothing, and they don't acknowledge it as bullying because they don't recognize the signs. So it's very important for you to have the knowledge to recognize what bullying is, have the knowledge to implement a strategy to curb bullying and to curb the lasting effects of what it may have on your child, because it will impact the life of your child.
Ms. Seymour?
Yeah, pretty much everything Ms. Lochan said, I think she summed it up pretty nicely. And, you know, it all comes down to parental guidance and instruction from a very early age. Don't think something is funny now, because that same thing that's funny now, it won't be funny a few years later when your child becomes a bully, or perhaps even when your child becomes a victim of bullying. Talk to your children now. Don't just depend on the teacher in the school to do it. Yeah, it's a plus if you have a good teacher that does it, but see it as your primary responsibility. Curb any habits that you see in them. Control what they watch, control their use of the internet, social media, the television, the kind of friends they come into contact with, and most of all, be open with them. When you're open with them, it allows them to express themselves to you more freely. If you have some kind of animosity with them, if they're being bullied, they would not necessarily feel that they want to come and tell you they're being bullied because mommy's always in a bad mood or something of the sort. Establish a good relationship with your child. I know it helps when they can be free to express themselves with you, even if they're wrong, even if they might have pushed someone and they come and tell you. That's good too, because it shows that they value the training that you would give to them. You can speak to them, let them know why it's not nice, why you should not do it, and perhaps when you go to school the next day, I need you to tell him or her that you're sorry, you should not have done it, and that you will not do it again. So yeah, starting from the home, leading right up, the teachers, the educators, the policies, the constitutions, but of course that's a long stretch ahead. But you know, as starters, start in the home. It helps.
Okay. Thank you both for being on air with me today. It was really great having you. From a parental aspect as well as an educator and a nurse. You really did shed some light on the issue, and even though we did not actually speak from the United Nations standpoint, or we didn't weigh in on anything that we saw on their website, some of the very things that we spoke about today, like implementing policies to protect children from bullying and cyberbullying, establishing national helplines, and advancement of ethical standards in school and the home to begin with. These are some of the very things that they've outlined on their website to curb bullying in a general sense around the world. So I think our discussion was fruitful, and again, thanks for having you, and do have a great rest of your day, everyone. Thanks for listening. Thanks for joining us. It was really great having you. We will continue this discussion on bullying, and we will have more people coming on to talk about this issue.
Thank you.